All right, it's 11 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks everyone for joining us today. This is the Colorado Seed Tool webinar hosted by me, Retta Brugger at Colorado State University Extension, and with our guest speakers from Colorado Parks and Wildlife, Danny Newman and Danielle Johnson, and I'll share more about them in just a second. Before we dive into the webinar itself, I wanted to do a couple housekeeping details on this webinar and tell you a little bit about why I was interested in it, interested in hosting it. So to start with, this is the Colorado Seed Tool webinar that you're on. Please stay muted as you enjoy the webinar, unless you want to ask a question. They are accepting questions live. You can also put questions in the chat. If you do use the chat, we're going to consolidate answering all of those at the end. In the event of a Zoom bombing, I'm just going to shut down the webinar, and then Danny and Danielle and I will get back on at a later date, record it, and we'll send out a closed caption copy through the link. So just know if we do get Zoom bombed, and I hope we do not, I'll be shutting down the webinar. And then finally, at the end of the webinar, we are recording, and we will send out a closed caption copy after it is recorded to anyone who has registered. So you'll be able to access the webinar. We may as well post it to my website, rangemanagement.extension.coloradostate.edu. So thank you again for joining today. Before we get going, I did want to mention that Colorado State University is an equal access and equal opportunity university. If you do require a Spanish translation of today's webinar, please go ahead and contact me, retta.brugger@coloradostate.edu. I will also put my email in the chat. So without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and introduce our two speakers. While I do that, would you two please start sharing your presentation? So our two speakers today are Danny Newman and Danielle Johnson. They're both with Colorado Parks and Wildlife. Danny Newman is a Northwest Region Land Use Specialist for Colorado Parks and Wildlife. She analyzes development impacts on wildlife and fisheries, assists with designing wildlife mitigation and management plans, and collaborates with stakeholders on long-term strategies to balance growth and conservation. She is a 2017 Prescott College graduate and began her CPW career in 2017 with the fisheries section. She owns a small farm with her husband in Eagle County and spends her free time horseback riding, hiking, traveling, skiing, and snowshoeing. And Danielle Johnson, Dr. Danielle Johnson has worked for Colorado Parks and Wildlife, researching ways to improve habitat since 2007. Her favorite projects involve testing new tools for restoration, often borrowing ideas from agriculture. She holds a PhD in ecology from Colorado State University. She lives in Rifle with her husband and two kids and enjoys gardening, reading, and hiking in her spare time. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to our two speakers. And I just want to say thank you, everyone, for coming today, as well as learning about this really cool tool. I wanted to host this webinar because I think I'm faced with the question all the time of what do I seed with for a specific purpose? And we could all get better at making recommendations or applying that knowledge in our own lives. So I was excited to hear about this tool, which is a really cool thing that they've done that combines local and expert knowledge with what we know about these species to make it more accessible for all of us to access knowledge about what to seed. So with that, I will hand it over to Danny, and she will tell us more about the tool.
Thanks so much for that enthusiastic introduction. We really appreciate the attention that the tool is getting. I wanted to confirm, can everybody see the presentation, and is the Zoom bar visible and blocking anything?
We see Colorado Seed Tool main screen. So
fantastic. That is ideal. So I wanted to start out with a little bit of history behind the project. So this started as, from my perspective, as an internal exercise. So CPW staff across sections were being called to review seed mixes with more frequency and more complexity due to a number of initiatives, from legislation passing to land use codes and industry reclamations, all sorts of things. So when we have such a diverse team working on these projects, expertise varies, and if a seed mix fails, money and time have been wasted, and that doesn't serve anybody well. And it also might lead to a subpar reclamation project that could actually be detrimental to the wildlife habitats that our agency is collaborating on and managing for properties that we have management authority. So I started asking questions and found that other CPW sections were thinking deeply about seeding and a seed mix effectiveness as well. So I reached out to Dr. Johnston and we had a field day, and a lot of brainstorming occurred, and then we teamed up to lead this effort. And I'm so grateful for her time and energy that she put into this. So it certainly helps my land use team and my statewide energy team be more effective, and then has applicability across many different CPW sections. And we were able to come up with a product that is not just useful to CPW, which is so exciting for me. It's a statewide tool that has so many different management goals that we'll get into that can inform, you know, more successful projects across like a breadth of interests. So that's where we started, and kind of a hint at where we ended up. And in general, right now, seed mix tools are such a hot topic. Arizona launched a tool that sees consistent use. Utah and Nevada are in the early phases of launching, and numerous habitat and restoration conferences have had seed mix tools on recent agendas. Some seed companies have tools. So our tool utilizes lessons that we've learned from other efforts and has unique features that we think have been pretty helpful here. I think I have a little bit of a delay when I go to switch slides, so hopefully that won't be too disruptive. Throughout this presentation, we do have a poll built in. So if you have a smartphone, you can go to your camera app and scan this QR code. It'll automatically bring up the poll and will prompt you to answer questions as we go along. You can also access the website, enter that code, and then it'll bring you to the poll on your desktop. So with that said, let's go ahead and answer the first question now. We'll have about 15 seconds per question to answer throughout the presentation, and then at the end, a little bit longer to answer some longer questions. About 15 seconds started on the clock for this first one. Okay, so getting into the tool itself, perhaps. It's available both in the Apple App Store and in the Google Play Store. So it does not have a desktop version at the moment, but on your smartphone, if you access one of these two icons on your screen, you can access your App Store, search for Colorado Seed Tool. It should come up. On the right is our little icon that you'll see to confirm that you're at the right product, and it should be relatively quick and simple to download. When you first access the app, you'll get these 3 flash screens that explain what can I do, what do I need, and what do I get. With this short little blurb, we'll go over all of those items in detail here.
Danny, you might just want to give folks a sec. I think there were a few people who had problems with the poll, but it worked for Retta. So Retta, do you want to tell people what you did? Maybe we can figure out why it's not working for some of the folks.
I don't know what I did. I took a picture and it took me there. So
that's the difference. If you use the QR code, it's typing the code that doesn't work.
Okay.
So the code is not working. Let's take a look at that real quick here. Apologize if something changed. Oh, great. It did change. I'm not sure why. That is unfortunate. So if you're using the website link, the code is 9245-6681. And maybe, Retta, if you wouldn't mind copying and pasting that into the chat every time there's a prompt, just so people have that code handy, that would be helpful. I'm not sure why that updated on menti.com after we populated our slides. So thanks for catching that, and apologies for that hiccup. So. Okay, so the seed mix tool has two different functions that you can select on your first screen. The first function I will run through, which is producing a seed menu. The second function, to verify seed mix, Dr. Johnston will run through in detail. It was important to us that this app be intuitive and easy to utilize the first time that someone opens it. We didn't want like creating a username and a login and adding an email or any contact information to be a barrier. So this first screen of selecting a project name is important. Make sure you name your project in something that's referenceable, because this is what will title the end product, the PDF, and there's no way to go back and reference projects that you've previously submitted. You have to run through the tool each time that you want to create a new PDF. So project name is critical. When you get into the management goal screen, you can select up to 3 options. We wanted to keep this somewhat limited. If you have a wide breadth of management goals, you might run the tool multiple times and try to target your sites a little bit more specifically. Alternatively, we did include a management goal for all adapted plants, and that will show anything that has a chance of growing on your location per the site criteria, without necessarily being targeted towards greater sage grouse or mule deer or bighorn or erosion control. It'll be a broader bucket. It'll show you everything that could work. And this is a function that could be used if somebody was looking at planting a native garden, perhaps. So we have our next poll question here. Please don't use that code. Use the code that Retta will throw in the chat, or scan the QR. We'll have about 15 seconds here for this next question. And I talked through most of that 15 seconds, but you can keep answering as we go. Okay. So the next screen, you can select native only or native and introduced species. We included introduced and didn't just have a native only tool because there is an agricultural application for this app. We are partially funded by the Habitat Partnership Program, and also our habitat reclamation and research experts within CPW do see utilization for introduced species when thoughtfully applied to the landscape. So if you do have a requirement because you're working with a federal agency, or a preference from your own perspective, or from a project proponent that requires native only, you can filter out anything introduced. And then you select your county and your elevation. The elevation is only one number, but you just put in the average for your site. If your site varies greatly in elevation, similar to the management goals, you might want to run it multiple times, or find an average across your site that you think would be effective. Then we get into some optional site criteria. The precipitation in our changing climate varies so wildly. This is important for seeding, but it is sometimes hard to find an average precipitation for your site, so it is optional. The same for soil texture and other conditions. The more information that you put in, the more refined your results will be, but less information can still produce helpful results. Okay, making sure I'm not missing a poll question here. So this is your end screen within the app itself. There's a results preview, which gives you a snapshot if you were to run this in the field or while you're having an on-the-fly conversation. You can see some critical information about what species have populated in your seed menu. There's icons that are explained in our PDF, but hopefully are intuitive: native, introduced, the shopping bag means commercially available. And then we have some tags that we'll get into the details of for proven, info, caution. Caution should not come up necessarily on your seed menu, but you can look through some species details. If you click on the icon, it'll bring you to an expanded page and give you some quick reference information. But we really want to drive people to the full results PDF. That's our flagship product. There's also, actually, let's answer the next question, and then I'll get into our comment form and our forum. So 15 more seconds on the clock. And again, please use the code that Retta will throw into the chat if you're on the website. this is the first time we've integrated a poll into our presentation, and we've given this presentation so many times, it's easy to just keep talking and maybe not remember the poll questions.
Oh, and what is the poll question, or what was this current poll question, please?
I don't have the numbers lined up. I think this is our third prompt. And I can't switch screens here to see what the third question is on Menti, but
I can read it. It's once you've purchased your seed mix, oops, sorry, I skipped ahead, but it was describe a word that, or a word that describes usually how getting a seed mix is to you. So examples were like frustrating, confusing, etc. And you could choose your own word.
Thank you. We have 8 or 9 poll questions, and I don't have the order completely memorized. So after you have put in all of your information, you can download, you can get a link for your poll results PDF, or you can have it emailed to you. And this is what those screens look like. And again, that is our flagship product. So that's where we like to drive people. There's also an opportunity to submit comments, which we really encourage everybody who uses the app to do. We will be refining the app. There will be future versions released. We want to hear from you, and any comments that you have about species that should be included, results that populated that you think are odd, recommendations, anything that you have to throw back our way that can help us refine or expand, please use that contact form. It will be monitored and responded to. We also have a discussion forum that we will dive into a little bit deeper if there's time at the end of the presentation, but we really want to get this going as a communication tool. Topics are broken up by additional information. We have a really robust frequently asked questions document that has information that's deeper regarding how the algorithm works, how to prep your site, the seeding rates, how to actually compile your seed mix, all sorts of really awesome information. There's also a seed mix calculator on the site, and then conversations broken up by county, so you can post about a specific project you have and maybe have a discussion if we get enough traction on the forum. There's also an introduction section that we encourage people to sign up and post an introduction on. The more that this forum gets used, the more visible it will be and the better informed conversations will be. Okay, so getting into our flagship product, here's our PDF. And this is an example from the seed menu function that I've been running through. There's a user guide with a lot of information as to how to utilize the results. We won't get into all those details, but there's a link to the forum, all sorts of information. And there's an expanded table key that'll be really helpful when you see what our outputs look like, but it explains what our color coding means in detail and what our tags mean. There's also a site summary on the right-hand side. This will help you verify that the information you put in was correct, because again, we don't save or log any projects attached to the username because there's no username. So here is our suitability chart. A suitability chart for a seed menu is pretty simple to read. Danielle will run through a more complicated suitability chart for our seed mix verification, but really this is showing what will work for your site criteria and for your management goals. So you have an adaptability key here, and that is how well the species or variety will work at your location per our information in our database. And then there's also a scale for the management goals that is on the right-hand side of the page. So when you're reading this, it's broken up by grasses, forbs, and shrubs. So grasses are up first, and you can see anything that's a medium to dark green is really adapted for your site. And then on the right-hand side, you would correlate that to your 3 selected management goals. And at a snapshot, the easiest way to use this is just look for the dark greens, and that'll point you in the right direction. Then you can spend more time teasing out, the lighter greens and building a seed mix with more variety if you need to. There's a comments column that has our info tags, caution tags, and then a qualities tag. So you can see what these species are at a snapshot, if they're perennial, if they're native, commercially available or not. It's just a snapshot. And you can also click on the common name, and it'll bring you down to the species detail page, which is similar to that results preview screen, but even more expanded. So you can see a lot more information. And this example shows the information attached to some of our tags for caution and info. So these are things that you would want to know if you were going to utilize this species on your project. We also have a blooming or green up period chart. So if you're site planning, you can use this as a snapshot to see what will be coming up on the landscape when, and make a kind of an educated decision from that perspective. So we have our next poll question here. Again, 15 seconds to answer, and please use the current code, not the code that is on the screen. All right, so for the next half of the presentation, we're going to switch over to Dr. Johnston explaining seed menu or seed mix verifications, and then what went on behind the scenes with our app and data collection.
Thank you, Danny. I really appreciate that great first half of the presentation. And just wondering if everybody can hear me and see me now. Yes, okay, great. So Danny ran through the seed menu, which is what you do when you're starting from scratch and you just want to know what's going to work at your site. But say you already have a mix in hand and you want to know, is this a good one for my site? So you can do that too. That would be your verify seed mix function. And it runs through exactly the same workflow that Danny just mentioned. So you're going to want to put in all of your site information, your county, elevation. Hopefully, you can throw in a precip number that is helpful if you can. And then your special conditions, soil type, and your management goals. All that is the same. And then you just also enter in the species. And you can search by either common name or scientific name and populate your list. And that's it. So it's basically the same workflow. Next slide. And then your output is just a little bit more complex because in this case, there might be some red on your charts. So your results preview could have a not recommended tag thrown in there if something you put in might not be suitable for your site. And then your suitability chart likewise might also have some red. And so the thing to take note of is that key that Danny was mentioning that's in like the user's guide at the beginning of the PDF. You're going to want to refer back to that, because if you have something that is not recommended, the first question that most people have is, well, why? And so you can figure out something about why if you look at the colors and then refer back to that key. So in this case, I ran an example that was a clay soil, and you can see the sand blue stem there is in pink on the left-hand side of the chart. And so that means that it's something about not being adapted to the site. So in this case, sand blue stem, not adapted to clay soil. Now, you're not going to be able to know exactly what facet of adaptation is not working. So it could be, not adapted to the county. It could be not adapted to the elevation. You won't know that level of detail. But if you see it on that left-hand side of the chart, that has to do with the adaptation to the site conditions. You'll know it's something to do with that. It also could be not recommended if it's, a non-native and you said native only. It also could be not recommended if it's got higher precip requirements than the minimum precip you put into the site. You'd see a red box there in the minimum precip column. And it also could be not recommended if it's discouraged for any of your management goals. So smooth brome is not compatible with mule deer habitat. So if you had only put in livestock grazing and erosion control, that wouldn't have been a concern. But if you throw in pollinators or mule deer or elk, that species will be not recommended because it's just not compatible with those goals. A few other things I wanted to point out on this chart, and this goes for either the seed mix verification or the seed menu. It's the darkest shade of green. So right here at the top, you see how Indian rice grass is in a very dark green. That means it's practitioner proven. So when you see that darkest shade of green, it means we actually talked to somebody who had experience in your county and said, yes, this has really worked for me. And same thing with the varieties there that are listed. If you see a variety in that darkest shade of green, we have some really specific knowledge to offer you about it. And it'll, has had a track record of being successful. I also wanted to point out a little bit more about the info tags. So our tool at this time, we're not addressing a couple pieces that may be of interest to you. So we're not looking at riparian areas, and we're not looking at we're not looking at irrigated areas. So this is only for uplands. And we did include some of the riparian species in our tool because a lot of those were facultative. So it was hard to decide, is this just exclusively a riparian species or not? And so for those facultative species, we included them with an info tag. We've got a lot of feedback about how this is not obvious enough. And so in a future version, we'll probably have some kind of separate tag for being riparian, or we'll have, a slider where you can exclude those species that require a little bit more soil moisture. But for now, the way you'll know that is it's in that info tag. So when you get your menu, you may want to be really, you're going to want to look at that part of the species detail page and see if it's a riparian species or not, because you're not going to want to plant that if you are strictly in an upland. Let's see. I think that's all I wanted to say there. Danny, next slide, please. So I wanted to go into a little bit of information about our selection algorithm. And so this is for people who like to, have a peek under the hood and want to know where we're getting these recommendations. So we scored everything on a scale of 0 to 4. And we said that everything has to have, higher than a 0. It has to be at least minimally adapted to all the different factors that you're going to put in that app. It's got, at least be minimally adapted to your county, elevation, soil type, and any special condition that you entered, because if it doesn't work on that soil type, it just is not going to work for you. And then if it's at least minimally adapted, we take an average, and then the average has to be at least a 2. So, that's kind of what we came up with, and we're, open to any kind of comments, but it seems to be working fairly well now. And then the darker the shade of green, the higher that number would be. And then we also did some filtering by management goal, as I kind of mentioned on the chart. So it can't be incompatible with the selected management goal. And it also has to have at least fair utility for at least one selected goal. So if it's just kind of a 0 utility for all of your goals, you're not going to see it on a seed menu, or it'll be not recommended if it's on a seed mix verification. And I just wanted to say here, sometimes people get really long PDFs, like you get like 200-page PDFs and really long lists. And actually, if you put in more management goals, you're going to have longer lists in general, because it'll filter out the ones that are incompatible with any of your goals, but it's also going to include things if they are at least fair utility for at least one goal. So the net effect of adding more management goals tends to be a longer list. And so if you feel like you're just getting too much information when you run it, you could just go back and select your one most important management goal, and that would help you get a more targeted list. Next slide. So we got our recommendations by, as we mentioned before, practitioner interviews, and we talked to restoration companies, landowners, BLM, CPW, academics, and we also, looked at existing seed mixes, web sources. We kind of scoured anywhere we could find it. And then we put all of this into an internal app that we use to compile our information and to record where we got our information. Next slide. So this is a map that we have in our internal tool that is for Four-Winged Saltbush. So say we get somebody who says, I don't think it's adapted to Dolores County. And we're like, well, our app says it is. Let me go back and look at where we got that. We can drill back into it, and we have a record of every single person that we talked to about Four-Winged Saltbush in Dolores County. We talked to, 3 different practitioners, and then we have a bunch of web sources. And so this really helps us because this is happening already as we're getting more quality control and more questions coming up, as we can go back and look at the quality of our information. And we have the ability to correct this in real time. So if you give us some feedback through that comment form, or you email us and say, hey, I really don't think this is right, we love that. We are wanting to make it better, and we know we need more information. And so we can take your opinion in, we can average it in, we can double check and ask ourselves, maybe this other opinion wasn't very good. We've actually had a couple sources that we've come to question over time as maybe being less reliable. And so we have the ability to correct this internal database, and it will update our phone app within seconds. So we're doing this all the time. It's a live kind of product that's definitely improving on a weekly basis. Next slide. Similarly, we've got the ability to drill into all of our environmental tools. So our environmental parameters, like this is like, say someone said, we don't think 401 saltfish works with fire. Like, why is it getting an average, adaptation to that? We can go back in and say, hey, we talked to 3 different people, and this is where we got that recommendation of being an average, response to fire. Same with our management goals. And next slide, please. So we did everything as much as we could by variety, because I know that is something that people struggle with, that I've struggled with, that you just don't know what variety to plant. And so we definitely tried to get that information from practitioners. We also use the Native Plant Seed Mapping Toolkit, which is Rob Masadi's tool, to fill in some of the gaps where we didn't have great information about varieties. And so what his tool does is it climate matches, which is a lot of times what you do if you don't have anything else to go on. You look at where that seed came from, right? And you ask yourself, is this similar to my location? And so you will just put that, knowledge in your brain and say, I feel like this is similar to my site. I think it'll work. Rob's tool does that, mathematically, more precisely, and then we use that to inform our variety recommendations in our tool too. So you can either go to Rob's tool, or you can use our output, because it's giving you very similar information about climate matching when we didn't have practitioner knowledge. Next slide. Oh yes, so we've got a little bit longer break here, because I know it's been hard for some of you guys to keep up with doing the poll. And yeah, and I do appreciate all the questions in the chat. We decided to hold those till the end, but yeah, we'll get to them, we promise. So anyway, you've got a minute now. I'm gonna play some music.
I like the clouds, I love the daffodils, I like the mountains, I love the rolling hills, I like the fireside when all the lights are low. I like the flowers, I love the daffodils, I like the mountains, I love the rolling hills, I like the fireside when all the lights are low. I like the fireside when the lights are low. I like the flowers, I love the daffodils, I like the mountains, I love the rolling hills, I like the fireside when all the lights are low. I like the fireside when the lights are low. I like the flowers, I love the daffodils, I like the mountains, I love the rolling hills, I like the fireside when all the lights are low.
So hopefully that was enough time for anybody who was behind on the poll questions to catch up. And any more questions, thank you for throwing those into the chat. I just saw one pop up that I'll answer at this point, because we got the maps up. We don't have the ability to display these varietal maps to you. I would recommend going to Rob's tool, the Native Plant Seed Mapping Toolkit, if you want to get that kind of a spatial idea for varieties. So next, let's see, next slide, please. That's where we're at with the tool. We've just done our beta launch, and we're doing, as I mentioned previously, bug fixing and feedback. We're trying to keep this live and keep improving it. And we're going to have another version come out next year. So that's where we're at with that. Next slide, please. I wanted to just give a shout out to all the people working on this. It's been such a fun project for me, working with Danny and just getting that kind of management like perspective. Terry did all of our behind the scenes paperwork. Eric Newkirk built our internal app where we're keeping all that information so that we can make our recommendations as good as possible. And then Ben's helping us with that too. Nate Nelson did our initial population of the database, and he gave his blood, sweat, and tears to it. Cameron and Troy also helped with that. And then we had a really great internal working group to help us quality control our recommendations. And all our practitioners we interviewed, we really want to show our appreciation for you. Also, HPP, the Habitat Partnership Program, gave us our initial funding to get off the ground. And then Fetchly was our vendor who produced our front-facing app. Next slide. So how you can help, we would love your help. So we want to keep abreast of all the new plant materials and the new information about what people are seeing work on the ground. So please do use that comment function that Danny mentioned within the app. You can also email us directly. I'm danielle.billieu@state, and then Danny's danielle.newman@state.co.us. And so you can do that. And we really would love it if you would go to our forum, because we're trying to build a community. And sometimes it's a little hard to get those communities off the ground. So please go to the forum, introduce yourself. You can get to it 3 different ways. You can get to it from the app. There's a button there. You can get to it from the PDF if you produce a PDF. There's a link to it from there, or you can go to bit.ly/coseed and put that into your browser. It doesn't really work very well to search for Colorado Seed Tool through Google because we don't have enough fire going yet for it to come up on search engines. So we're asking people to try to, get there one of these 3 ways and introduce yourself. So next we are going to move into our poll results, and then we'll come back and answer some questions. I love seeing all the questions in the chat. Also, if you did your homework, we asked people to run the tool in our email we sent out. And if you've got any specific questions, like if you ran the tool and you've got output specific to some place about and you want to talk about it, we'll get to that too. So handing it off now to Danny for some results.
Perfect, thanks. All right. So our first question when initiating a seed project, what is the biggest hurdle for you? You can see the results displayed here. The top 3 are not knowing what species to plant, plant materials aren't available, and not knowing what varieties to plant. That's helpful. All of this will help us think about how the app is getting utilized and how our next versions might go. So our management goals that would most often be utilized, the top 3, erosion control, pollinator, and livestock. And it seems like the wildlife goals are in 7 through 12. Okay. And here's a word cloud for words used to describe compiling or verifying seed mixes. Just kind of a little bit of humor here. God awful, grass heavy, monotonous, some good things, creative, fun, exciting, interesting, hopeful. So I wanted to leave this one open because I thought we might get some funny answers like burdensome and god awful. So once you've purchased your seed mix, how different is that mix from your original preference? Very encouraging that answers came in that were very similar and somewhat different, very different. An exact match were tied. To what degree has budget altered your ideal mix? We do hear often about reducing forbs. Forbs are expensive. We struggle with that in our wildlife reclamations and some of our industrial reclamations. Depends on how large the area is. There's maybe more availability than the budget. Often impacts. So kind of all over the spectrum here, but native seeds are expensive. Yes. Yeah, so some helpful information for us to read through after this. What would your primary use of this app be? Guidance, and a lot of really good answers here in the word cloud. Reclamation, a starting place, education of landowners, right-of-way reclamation. So perfect. Roughly how many brand new seed mixes do you compile or review in an average year? Some people are just starting out. Some don't tend to review or compile, and then some have quite the heavy workload, 200 plus. That person has a workload. Wow. If your previous answer, that slide is supposed to be confidential, so we won't leave that up. So if you do work on this, we did want your contact information so we could reach out and see if you have anything to contribute to the app if you're willing to engage with us on that level. So thank you for engaging in the poll. We will go back to our slides and get into our Q&A here, and also feel free to continue adding questions. We will answer as much as we can as we go, and I'll pull up any applicable slides that we might need to reference along the way.
So, Retta, can we lean on you a little bit to help us with the chat questions?
Yeah, so a bunch of questions came in and I will go in order of arrival. So the first question is, are the plant scientific names according to the USDA plant database?
Almost always. So there were a few cases where we always went the scientific name, yes, always. And then common names too, except for there were a few of them that just wasn't the common name that's used in Colorado at all. And so there's a few cases where we went with a different common name, but the scientific names, yes.
Great, thank you. And then a couple questions on, say one more time, how do we access the seed tool?
On your phone,
Yes.
Google Play Store if it's Android, App Store if it's a Apple phone, and then search Colorado Seed Tool. Takes about 10 seconds to download to your phone.
Okay, and so you get the app on your phone, but then the community forum is through that link you sent.
Right, you can get to the forum through the app. So once you get, into the app, there's a button to get to the forum, or, the app produces a PDF that you can email to yourself. And there's a link in that PDF, or you can search for it with the URL.
Great. Are you planning on doing riparian as a management goal in the future?
I think so. Danny, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, we would like to. It is pretty complicated, and then we get into plugs and just some territory that we did not really have the bandwidth to tackle in this first version. So demonstrating use of this first version is really important to our team because it'll help us obtain funding and grow. So please use it so that our quarterly reports justify an expansion into riparian or irrigated conditions. I do want to, we highlighted the technicians who really helped populate this database, but I want to really acknowledge what a heavy lift they had. Literally about 4 times the work, if not more, was completed on the database than we had anticipated or hoped or dared to hope for in this first version. So adding in riparian would probably be a comparable lift, but we're hopeful that future versions will include that.
Great, thank you. Is it possible to get the results output in a CSV or XLS file as an alternative to the PDF?
Not at this time, but I love that suggestion. That's the way I always want to see my output too. Because you can manipulate it, you can play with it, you don't have to re-enter data. I'll write that down for our next version. That's a great suggestion.
Great. What is the source of the soil information, especially problem soils?
So we had a lot of sources, we scoured, we got information from wherever we could. A lot of it is from, the USDA plants database. If there was a PDF for that species, we definitely used that. But, Flora of Colorado, or, practitioners too, just saying, hey, yeah, this has worked for me great on clay soils. We used all of those sources of information.
Okay, so, well, it was like Surgo soil to inform the location if people are like,
we didn't use Surgo.
Okay, didn't use Surgo.
Yeah, no, because we thought about trying to do it, but that would require a finer spatial scale. And since we're basing it all like on county and just kind of like, general broader scale looks, we didn't use Surgo.
Okay, and okay, back on track. Now my question, but if you define the soil type when you when you go into the app, so you would have to bring that knowledge to the app, and then in the app you all have provided if that species works well with a particular soil type. Is that
Correct.
okay?
Yes.
Great.
And I do want to point out on some of these screens here, you do have these little info buttons, little question marks. And if you hit on that, a little prompt will come up that will help you out. But in our user guide and on the FAQ, we do recommend if you don't know your soil type, that you utilize local resources to test your soil and get more information to get a more refined output. So.
Great. Thank you. And then I think at least 2 questions about the other seed tool you mentioned, I think to look at the varietal maps. And if you can, I would suggest putting that in the chat so people have that.
Yes.
Exactly. Thank you.
I will find that link.
Okay. And then I guess final question we have in the chat, and then I have a couple questions, is will a desktop version be released?
I would love to see a desktop version. We are considering that for the next. We thought about that hard with this version and just didn't have the bandwidth to do it. But I think that's a great addition. I would love to see that. And this is the native plant seed mapping toolkit I'm putting in the chat here. Great resource.
Yeah, with this first beta release that we put out, we were really looking at feeling out use and utility and seeing what traction it gets, and having it on the smartphone seemed like the best way to demonstrate use and the need for growth. So if we could grow and have a desktop version that complements it, that's on the list. So again, another plug to please use it and use it frequently so our data gets us more funding.
Cool. Actually, we have a couple more questions. So how do we find out if the species on the list generated are compatible with riparian areas, or are none of the outputs by the Colorado Seed Tool compatible with riparian areas?
Right. So that was in the info tag. So we did record what type of riparian species it is. So if you see on the suitability chart that blue info tag, that doesn't necessarily mean it's riparian, because there's other pieces of information that we also included under info tags. But that's where we put all the riparian information. This one's not riparian, but if it were, you would see it right there. And it would tell you if it was a facultative upland, a facultative, wetland, all those kind of USDA categorizations of wetland plants would be noted right there.
Great. And then what if the soil is a sandy clay? What would be the best option to put that under for soil in the app? Yeah,
that's a great question. There's some nuances that are very hard to collect in a database. Yeah, I would think that the clay would be more limiting to plants. I don't know, but you might want to run it a couple different ways and then talk to some folks, because this doesn't replace practitioner knowledge, right? We're compiling a lot of information and it's a great starting place, but people who have worked in your area, who've been on the ground, are going to have more information. They're going to be able to get to the heart of some of this nuance, how things interact, much better than we can. So yeah,
so along those lines, I have a question. It looks like there aren't any more in the chat for now. So along those lines, when I use the seed tool, I got a long list of species, and then I guess as a practitioner, how do you get to a mix with rates from that long list? What's your process?
Yeah, so great question. There's a lot of work still to do, right? Like a long list is not it's maybe getting you 30% of the way there. Oh, yeah, sorry, Carrie's asking, I think the question she wanted answered. We don't have the ability to show you the varietal maps. If there's a variety you're really interested in, you want to see a map for, email me and I will screenshot it and email it to you. But we can't give people access to our internal database that shows those. Your question about getting to an actual mix. So we really encourage you to go to the forum. There's information there, but basically you're going to have to find the prices. You're going to have to figure out what percentage of each species to plant, and you're going to have to know the seeds per pound information. So those are the kind of pieces of information that you've got to pull together to get from your seed menu to a seed mix. And there's some steps kind of on the form that can kind of give it that to you kind of more in a narrative form. And then there's a calculator. Call a reclamation consultant. Yes. Yeah, we're not trying to replace like people who have this expertise. Like you probably will want to talk to a professional. But if you're just a real do-it-yourselfer, you can, I mean, there's a lot of these calculators out there, and we are also offering one. And I'll just show you real quick what it looks like, ours looks like, and you can go to whatever calculator you want, but this was what ours looks like. And so you put in your total number of seeds per square foot. We've got a little bit of guidance about that could vary by your area, your project area in acres. All of the yellow parts you would have to fill in, all of the white parts will be calculated for you. You got to enter in what species you want to use. And then your seeds per pound, you can get that from the species detail page on our PDF. And I just want to plug the work that our technicians did here. We did this very thoughtfully. So there's like really good information in the seed information database that we use. We also refer to Granite Seed and the USDA Plants website in a thoughtful way. There's more info on the forum about exactly how we did that, but I think we have the best seeds per pound information out there. And then of course your prices you'll have to get by calling vendors. And then you've got to decide on your percentage of mix, and it has to total to 100. And here's just an example. And then usually, you know, once you put your prices in there and you see your price per acre, then you've got to have a reality check and tweak things to get that number down. But anyway, that's kind of how you would do it. And there's more guidance on the forum about like how you choose these percentages. If it's an aggressive species, you might want to go lower. If it's a small seeded species, you might want to go higher. And then I have my 2 cents in here about broadleaf to grass ratio, because I think you really do need a high ratio of forbs and shrubs to grasses for anything but an erosion control type management goal. So this calculator will give you that number, so you can play around with that too. All right. Any questions on that from anybody?
All right. I guess while people think of questions on that, thank you for showing that. I have another question. When you showed your example with inland saltgrass, and it made me think, because inland saltgrass isn't hugely palatable to livestock and it can cause issues if it's consumed in high qualities. So it made me wonder, is that reflecting like resilience or resistance to cattle grazing or to grazing versus palatability? Or are both of those in the database for how you categorize species?
Do you want to address that one, Danny?
Yeah, livestock was like my pet topic for a while there. And it is very challenging. Toxicity is so nuanced, you know, it can be based on the time of year, amount consumed, other nutrition deficiencies that make something more palatable in a certain circumstance. So in our user guide, we do say that we do not address livestock toxicity within the app, or challenges that could come up with grazing. So that is another case of it being important if you are not a professional practitioner yourself to reach out. This tool is a starting point. We cannot stress that enough. It does not replace consultation or specific knowledge of the species that's grazing out there and complications that could occur at certain times of year with certain plants.
We do have like the very most toxic things. If you enter a livestock grazing management goal, it would be discouraged for that goal. So it's going to filter out like the most egregious things. But something like inland saltgrass, where they can tolerate a little bit of it, but not a lot, you know, that was pretty tough for us to address. So that's just one of those, you know, where anytime you transcribe the real world into a database, you're going to lose nuance. And, you know, I have had some philosophical heartburn about this whole project, just because I don't think you can boil nature down to an app. So, yeah, that's another one of those cases where you definitely want to talk to people who are in the know.
All right, cool. Okay, so I say we have time for a couple more questions, but there's one more that has appeared in the chat that's asking, is there a link to the seed mix calculator Excel file?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's from that forum. So if you go to that bit dot or bit.ly/coseed, then you can get to our thread about how do I forget what the thread is called. Actually, no, it's right there at the top. It should be pinned. Like the calculator should be pinned near the top.
Yeah, it's under the starting docs and it says calculator right there. I also want to point out too, this tool in the areas that I've been able to use it over the past few months has resulted in more diverse seed mixes with a higher degree of confidence and replaced some more expensive seed mixes. So that's something that I meant to point out in the presentation. Our outputs don't always result in a more expensive project, so that seed mix calculator is really helpful. We've been able to put out cheaper seed mixes that are more targeted for management goals and the site conditions. So that's been a huge win for our internal work group.
Awesome. So final question, or just it'd be cool to see the forum FAQs if you could show those or talk a little bit about, just emphasize the forum one more time. And then if there's no other questions, we'll wrap it up.
Yes. Yeah, so this is our main screen of our forum. You can see how the sections are organized. So here's the start here, the frequently asked questions, the seed mix calculator, and how to use the forum in general. And then you have an open thread for general discussions, introductions, and professional contacts, and then the discussions broken down by county. So currently, Dr. Johnson and I are the only two professional contacts on here. We hope after this webinar, there will be some more.
All right. Well, thanks for showing that. I think that will be a really great resource. So on that note, I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat.
I have one. Can
Oh,
you
there's
please?
one. Good.
Thanks. Please repeat how you joined the forum, because I think somehow I missed that part and I would like to participate. So.
Yes, thank you. First off, so when you come to this page and you do not have a profile, I do believe it will be in the top right for you to set up a username on our forum hosting website, which is tapatalk.com. So you'll create a Tapatalk username and login, and then be able to join and post in our forum. I hope that's correct because I've had a username for a while here.
And what is the site, please, or how do I find it?
So you type in, it's a shortened URL. You'll go up into your bar and type in bit.ly/CO Colorado seed. So COSEED. And when you hit enter, that will reload the forum as demonstrated here. And then since I've logged out, you can see, well, looks like my bandwidth is not happy. Now that I'm logged out, you can see the buttons on the top right that say join or log in.
Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for going to it.
Cool. Okay, actually, we have 3 more questions in the next 2 minutes. So one came in: when CPW recommends or approves seed mixes, do they only approve the species with green boxes next to the site adaptability and green boxes next to precipitation, key, and management goals, or would the white boxes be acceptable as well?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and I'll take a stab at it because that falls into my land use reviews quite frequently. The white boxes represent no utility, so it's not necessarily going to be detrimental to that management goal, but it wouldn't be specifically useful. So if there are green options for the targeted management goals, like if it's an oil and gas cab that's a reclamation within maybe greater sage grouse, elk and mule deer habitat, we would want to select a mix that's going to have a green utility for those species. And, you know, if we do have a management goal of, say, maybe livestock grazing, we might select a few species that provide maybe some more resilient grazing grasses, introduce pasture grasses into that mix. But we would want to make sure a good proportion of the components targets our wildlife management goals, being the wildlife management agency that we are.
Great. And final question, is there a saline alkaline soil rehabilitation category to select seed mixes for?
So we don't specifically have that, but we do have a saline soils button that you can do under the other conditions that will filter out and try to get species that are saline adapted. As far as like, you know, restoration, we do have that formerly irrigated acreage button too, which gets at some of that, because often you have high saline with those formerly irrigated acres. So, and there's a great thread, Trent Burkwer, one of our habitat coordinators, put a lot of time into some really great recommendations for formerly irrigated acres too on the forum.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And on that note, it's 12 o'clock, so we'll end the webinar. I really want to thank Danielle and Danny for presenting this tool to us today. I think it's a really great resource. So thank you for doing this, presenting to us, and I'll send out the link to everyone who registered with a closed caption copy. So thank you, everyone, and have a good day.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
everybody.